Okay, we'll make a start. The numbers are still going up slightly, but hopefully we'll join us as we go. So good evening and welcome to today's webinar, where we welcome Kidscape to share insight into the roles and responsibilities of school governors in tackling bullying in schools. We know that bullying can have a devastating impact on students, affecting a child's mental as well as physical health, and it can lead to heightened levels of anxiety and depression, and also affects their aspirations and outcomes. As governors, we should be monitoring incidents of bullying in our schools to ensure they're minimised and dealt with quickly and effectively. As you'll probably be aware, this week is Anti-Bullying Week with the theme of Reach Out. So we're using this webinar to reach out to you as governors, help you have the knowledge and tools to review bullying at a strategic level in your schools. We hope that you in turn will reach out to your board to put the learning of today's webinar into practice. We're really delighted that our partner Allen&Overy have kindly sponsored us to deliver both this webinar and an accompanying e-learning, which we'll be releasing next week. This means they're both free to access for all governors and trustees, whether that's you or any of your other board members. Lauren Smith, CEO of Kidscape, will be delivering this session for us to share her expertise in the field. We're welcoming questions into the Q&A function, and we've also got the chat function turned on, and Lauren will be putting some questions to you, which we'll be really delighted to hear your thoughts and feedback about. If we don't get to all the questions during the session, we've left some time at the end, so we'll cover as many as possible then. So please do add any that you have during the webinar. Before we start, a few pieces of housekeeping. The webinar is being recorded and we've enabled closed captions. You'll receive an email with a link to the recording and slides, hopefully tomorrow, and you're warmly welcome to share this email with your fellow board members. So without further ado, over to you, Lauren.
Thank you so much. Really delighted to be here with you all this evening on Anti-Bullying Week, which is a fabulous occasion. The theme this year is Reach Out, and we've been looking at all the various ways we can reach out to support the children and young people in our lives. And as governors, you have an absolutely critical role. And I hope tonight that we can share as much as possible with you. Like Hannah said, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions and we will have some time for those at the end. But if there's anything that's not covered, please do get in contact after the event, and really happy to help out. So without further ado, I'm going to share the presentation. And hopefully you can see that. Hannah, can you just give me a nod? All good. Right, fantastic. So anti-bullying training for governors in England. As Hannah has said, I'm Lauren Smith and I'm CEO of the bullying prevention charity Kidscape. For those of you that don't know Kidscape, we've been around since the 1980s, and we're here principally to give practical support to children and families who've been impacted by bullying. We run a parent advice line, we run monthly workshops for children and families impacted by bullying, as well as lots of training in schools, communities, sports clubs, you name it, to help create supportive communities where all our children are safe from bullying and harm. I've been working with children and families for about 20 years, and in the anti-bullying sector for over 12 years. So there's not much that we haven't come across in that time, though things never fail to surprise us. So I really hope that tonight's session is helpful, but like I've said, anything that comes up, then please do get in touch. So what will we be covering? It's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour and quite a lot of content to go over in an hour. But it will be recorded and there will be the follow-up online training for you to take part in and for your fellow board members. So we're going to look at a little bit around understanding bullying, around how do we prevent and respond to bullying, the roles and responsibilities of governors, and then finally where you can get further help and support. So first of all, starting off, understanding bullying. Now, there's a lot of us on the call tonight, so we're not going to be able to have as much interaction as we would normally have, and we can have with smaller groups. But I would love to just start off by you putting in the chat the answer to the question, why is it important for governors to have an understanding of bullying? And I guess part of that is that what's brought you here this evening. So why is it important for governors to have an understanding of bullying? Catherine, go for it. Anyone that's raised a hand, please just unmute and just share with us.
I can't seem to do the putting the captions thing online. I was going to say it kind of destroys lives. It's hugely influential to everything in their future.
Absolutely. Thanks, Catherine. And those of you who are following Anti-Bullying Week, there's always at this time of year, there's lots of stories about the very personal impact of bullying on children's lives. Thank you. Fiona. Fiona Wilson, did you want to share? Catherine Forster.
I already just spoke, actually.
Oh, sorry, Catherine, that's all right. I can see your hand. And we've got in the chat, we want our children to feel safe and happy in schools. Anyone else who's got their hands raised, just come off mute and share with us.
If we don't understand it, then we're not going to be able to deal with it.
Yeah, thanks, Max. And we'll talk about the different ways that this, governors do have responsibilities and roles around bullying. So it's so important to have that understanding. Susan.
Really, it's just so as governors, we can ensure that our schools are doing everything possible to support children who are being bullied, and also to challenge if we feel that there is a gap anywhere.
Absolutely, absolutely, Fiona. And such a critical role of governors is to be able to give that constructive challenge. Abin.
I think I'd like to follow on from what Fiona just said. I think for us, us as governors having an understanding means we're in a better position to then be able to challenge the school and also be able to look at and support the school in terms of what is their policy and what is their stance on bullying, which then means if other parents are raising those same issues, we're able to act more as a critical friend once we understand the importance of bullying and having policies in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's challenging for governors, isn't it? Because you have to be across so many different issues. But having that knowledge is really vital if we're able to give the best challenge that we possibly can and the best support to our school leaders. But I'm going to go for one more, just as I can see on my screen. John Webb, over to you.
Thank you. Basically, if a child's being bullied, it's very hard to educate them, it seems to me, because all their attention is on how to protect themselves. And later on at secondary, I'm actually a primary school governor, but I think at secondary school it leads to self-harming and possibly worse. So I think it's absolutely vital that everybody involved in the school has a very strong view on bullying and what it looks like and what to do about it.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. And that's so important. If children don't feel safe and they don't feel happy, then it's very, very hard to learn within that environment. Fantastic. Thank you all so much. So we'll get to it. So a few key reasons why it's important for governors to have an understanding of bullying. Schools have a legal duty to prevent bullying and keep pupils safe, and we'll talk a little bit more around the law. Bullying is a top concern for children, parents and carers. The Anti-Bullying Alliance released some new statistics this week as part of Anti-Bullying Alliance, and they surveyed over 30,000 young people, and they found that 1 in 4 young people had reported experiencing bullying in the previous few weeks. And for those children on free school meals, it's 30% of children and 31% of children with a disability or a special educational need. So we're still seeing very high levels of experience of bullying within our schools in the UK. As governors, you may have to handle a complaint about bullying, or you may have to respond to a major incident. And sometimes these things hit the press. We'll talk a little bit more about that, and it's intrinsic to school reputation. I'm a mum of a 9 and an 11-year-old, and I think in this day and age, so much gets passed around on social media. There are so many parent platforms, and that creates real challenges for schools. And one of the big hot topics is always bullying and experience bullying, and how parents are experiencing schools. And that's not always easy for schools. That can be very difficult to handle. But bullying is always one of those issues that comes up. So what is bullying? And I'm really sorry, I've seen there's a couple of raised hands, but we're going to have to come to some Q&A at the end, if that's okay, if you can just hold on to your questions, because there's going to be lots to cover tonight. But how do we define bullying? And this is a really important place to start within your school communities, is that understanding of bullying and having that shared understanding. So the Department for Education, in preventing and tackling bullying, which is the guidance for head teachers, staff and governing bodies, defines bullying as behaviour by an individual or group that's repeated over time that intentionally hurts others, either physically or emotionally. So this is pretty much accepted within kind of academic research, that we're looking at behaviour that's repeated and that's intentional. And sometimes we say to children several times on purpose as a way of trying to remember that intention and that repetition. And we also talk to children about the imbalance of power as well. So bullying being a behaviour where it's hard for the other person or the other people to defend themselves. A little bit on bullying and the law, which is important for you to understand as governors. Bullying in itself is not a criminal offence in the UK, but of course there are times when bullying behaviour can constitute an offence. It's a spectrum of behaviour, and certainly on the parent advice line that Kidscape runs, we see all of these different types of behaviours at different times, and some of that behaviour does move into criminal behaviour. And examples of that would be physical and sexual assault and some malicious communications online. So every school is under a duty to prevent bullying and a duty to prevent harassment and discrimination. And of course, under the Equality Act 2010, children with protected characteristics have additional protections. Really importantly, bullying is a child protection concern, and keeping children safe in education has really tightened up on this over the years. So the most recent edition talks about bullying as a form of child-on-child abuse, and that's really, really important. And the reason for that is I think there's a much better understanding now that bullying can have that really profound impact on a child's life. And schools also have disciplinary powers to conduct pupils' behaviour when they're not on school premises, and regulate pupils' behaviours in those circumstances. And this can be a particular challenge for schools around responsibilities outside of school and responsibilities for bullying outside of school. But what we say as a charity is if a situation is affecting how a child feels about coming into school and is affecting their learning, it's really important that schools take responsibility for that and work with the children and families to resolve that situation. So how prevalent is bullying? This is quite a difficult question because there is not a government data set for bullying. The Department for Education does bits of research here and now, but since the Tell Us survey that some of you might remember, which was last, I think, over a decade ago, we've not had that national data set. So we're reliant on bits of research, charities research, other things that are out there. Thankfully, bullying is very well researched. It's a big interest area for lots of different academics for different reasons. And of course, we have the Anti-Bullying Alliance with that really big, rich data set that they have now. So here's some statistics. We've already mentioned some that have come out today. I think research from the OECD is really interesting because it looks at bullying in the UK compared to other nations. And what it found was that nearly 30% of school leaders reported non-physical and physical forms of bullying occurring at least weekly, and you've seen there'd been really quite a dramatic rise, and that 2.6% of English school leaders reported injury caused by violence happening every week compared to an average of 2%. 13% of secondary school English leaders have had reports about hurtful posts on the internet, and that was compared to an average of 2.5%. So again, much, much higher numbers in the UK. And there's lots of research into the impact of bullying on mental health, of online bullying from different sources. And we've seen here it's the main reason children under 11 contacted Childline, and has been one of the top concerns every year since 1989. So despite very high levels of awareness of bullying, we've still got a real challenge within our schools. And a piece of research that was done by Action for Children in 2019, they weren't necessarily looking for this as an answer, but they asked children and parents and grandparents what they thought was the main barrier to having a good childhood. And every group said bullying was seen as the top barrier to having a good childhood. So again, you can see, even if people's experiences may not necessarily, people may not necessarily have experienced bullying, but the fear of bullying is very, very high in the UK. So who's most vulnerable to bullying? This will be different in different communities, and so much of it is about those minoritized groups within schools. And children very often do target difference in others, and that's played out in research. And so there's a vast categories, many categories of children that feel in the minority or feel different for lots of different reasons. And we've included some of those children there. And some of the examples of that are children in lower income families. We've touched on that, the recent Anti-Bullying Alliance statistics. We know that children living in poverty are very vulnerable to bullying. But interestingly, what Anti-Bullying Alliance have found is that if you're in receipt of free school meals, but the majority of children are, you experience lower levels of bullying. But if you're in the minority within your school, you're much more likely to experience bullying. We know that disabled children and children with additional needs are significantly more likely to be bullied. We've got a statistic there that's saying once every 2 weeks or more often, 21% compared to 12% of non-disabled young people. So we know that that's a really big risk factor. We know that LGBT young people are significantly more likely to be impacted within schools. And we've seen there that 40% of children have said that they would hide an aspect of themselves for fear of being bullied. So we know that these minority groups are particularly at risk within our schools, and that will be different in different communities. So it's worth thinking about within your school, who might those children be? Who are those children that might be on the margins within your community and might be particularly vulnerable to bullying? So why do children bully others? We could have a whole session just on this. And depending on kind of where you come, what academic discipline you come from, you might take a different view around this or approach this in different ways. But what we would say is we're all capable of bullying behaviour, which is a really important thing to acknowledge. We try and avoid using terms like bully and victim, because children can see it as a fixed state, but it's a role that we can be in at different times. And there are so many different influences on children's behaviour. And we've got here, you know, a description that it can be to do with your individual circumstances, your family dynamics, your emotional regulation, your past experiences. We also know that the peer group are really, really influential. That's particularly the case when you move into adolescence, into the teenage years, that move into secondary school. As children start to move away from their parents' influence, we know that the peer group and peer group dynamics can create real challenges within our schools. The school culture makes a real difference, and we'll come on and talk about this because this is one area where as governors, you have more influence and more control. And then we also know that what's going on at a local community level, you know, where there's tension in the local community, that can have an impact on the school community. And of course, our society has an impact on the behaviour of our children and young people. And that can be the case in lots of different ways for lots of different reasons. But I think one thing we can acknowledge is that we do live in quite a toxic culture in the UK. We've seen lots of examples of bullying behaviour in recent times within Parliament, and that goes for both sides of the House. And we also have our tabloid press that's notorious for its behaviour towards people. And so we live in this society where we do see high levels of bullying behaviour, and that can be really challenging. We also see huge amounts of kindness and compassion as well within the UK. But children are living in this environment where they're really drawing on the behaviour of adults around them, and that's so important to acknowledge. So one thing we talk children through when we go in and deliver workshops in schools are the different roles in a bullying situation. And that comes back to what I was saying about bullying being a behaviour rather than a sort of personality type. And this was a piece of research done by a great guy called Allen&Overy, looking and studying those different bullying roles within bullying scenarios. And what he tended to see is that you have your main leader, your main perpetrator that kind of starts the behaviour and takes an active role. And then around that person, you have these various characters that are taking different roles. So you have your target, but then you have your followers, your supporters, your active supporters and your passive supporters. And then moving around, you have your bystanders and then your upstanders. And a lot of the work that we do with children and young people is around really encouraging them to take that upstander role. So to be that young person that recognises bullying behaviour, but really takes an active role to stop it. And that's what we should want for all of us. And it's easier said than done. And we talk about safe ways that children can do that within their peer group. But it's so important that children recognise that they do have agency within these scenarios, but that we can hold different roles at different times. And when we run this workshop in schools, it's really interesting how children will reflect, and they will say, you know what, there's been times where I've been the perpetrator and I've been a supporter of what I've seen. There's other times where I've been the target, and you know, sometimes I have been that upstander. And so helping children to really think about what goes on within a bullying incident is really important, because I think sometimes it's seen as a one-on-one scenario, but very often it's much more complicated than that, and the wider peer group are usually involved in one way or other. So what's the impact of bullying? And at the beginning, you know, some of you mentioned this. It's very well researched, both the impact on physical and mental health, the impact on achievement, the impact on relationships. I took part in a radio interview earlier on today where they'd asked some of the presenters about their own experiences of school, and so many of them reflected on actually really serious experiences of bullying that they'd had themselves in childhood. And I'm sure some of you on this call will have had your own experiences that you still carry with you now. But what research suggests, and this is just a tiny amount of examples, there's so much research around this, but bullied children 8 times more likely to develop depression in childhood and depression into adulthood. So we do see that really profound impact on mental health. Of the children who attended our ZAC workshops, which are workshops to give support to children impacted by bullying, 45% of them had said bullying had led to time out of school. So we see really high levels of school absenteeism in the children that we support. 92% of the children who attended our workshop said it had impacted their physical or mental health. And research from the Department for Education there from a few years ago showed that, you know, equivalent to 2 grades lower GCSE results for those children who are experiencing severe bullying. So earlier on, when we touched on the importance of this within schools, you know, it does have an impact on children's achievement within school if they don't feel safe. So what are the different types of bullying? There is, of course, physical bullying, and some of us who were old enough will remember Grange Hill and your kind of stereotypical idea of what bullying looks like. Sadly, certainly from the calls that come through to our parent advice line and the children that come to our workshops, we do still see high levels of physical assault within schools. So it's important. I think sometimes there's a view that doesn't happen anymore, but it does still happen. Emotional bullying, that's the thing that's often harder to detect. So the spreading of rumours, manipulation, social exclusion, which can be equally painful for our young people. Verbal bullying, name calling, comments. When you survey children about what type of bullying they've experienced, they always say that verbal bullying is the most common form of bullying. And then, of course, online bullying, which has had a real rise over the last 10 years. And typically it's kind of sharing of messages on WhatsApp groups, impersonation, threats of harm, rumours and accusations. But what I would say is what children often tell us is that their experiences of online bullying are usually an extension of what's going on in the school day, and it's usually the wider peer group. It's not often strangers. So again, it's about their relationships within school then being played out online and vice versa, which is really important to be aware of. And again, the children that come through to Kidscape commonly talk about experiencing all of these forms of bullying at one time or another. So they're often related to one another. So what are some of the signs and symptoms of bullying? We do lots of workshops with parents and carers, and we always say, you know your child best. So parents are really well placed to look for behaviour changes in their children because it's different for every child. But typically you might see some level of physical injury in children, so children coming home with unexplained injuries. Headaches and tummy upsets are really, really common. So children, you know, that experience of anxiety affecting children physically, particularly on a Sunday night, not wanting to come to school the next day. We see high levels of self-harm in children that come through our workshops. And then that absenteeism from school, that withdrawing from activities. And then, of course, it impacts children emotionally. So for some children, they'll become a lot more withdrawn. Others will start to act out, and we'll see depression and anxiety. And so these things really go hand in hand with experiences of bullying. We do a lot of work with children in the classroom. We deliver ZAC workshops where we go in and we help children really understand what bullying looks like. And big challenge is around the difference between bullying and banter and teasing. And we have quite a teasing culture within the UK. I mean, look at Shakespeare, and I'm sure those of you who know your literature on this call could give lots of examples of kind of that type of culture. And we see that again played out in our politics and the way we conduct debate. And it can be challenging because we often get a lot of banter and teasing within families as well. And what we have to talk to children about is, when do you know that you've crossed a line and that behaviour has then turned into bullying behaviour towards other young people? And this takes up quite a lot of work for teachers as well, working out exactly what's gone on amongst groups of young people. But we talk about bullying being behaviour, again, where there's that intention to harm, where the people involved feel scared and isolated, the people watching are uncomfortable and are embarrassed, and it has that impact on children. So all the things that we've talked about, the impact on physical, mental health, the absenteeism from school. Whereas banter, if it's good natured, it strengthens bonds and people involved feel happy and included, and it helps to create and support positive relationships. It's really important that children learn to understand when they've crossed a line with somebody, and to recognise when they might have started to hurt someone's feelings, because we know that this takes up lots of time in schools trying to work out exactly what's happened in a situation. So part 2, a little bit on preventing and responding to bullying. So the Department for Education in preventing and tackling bullying say that successful schools create an environment that prevents bullying from being a serious problem in the first place. School staff, head teachers and governors are best placed to decide how best to respond to the particular issues that affect their pupils. And knowing your pupil population is so important. Really listening to the experiences of your children and young people is absolutely critical. That gives you what you need in order to really support that environment where it's much less likely that bullying behaviour will take place. So we're going to take you through, again, a bit of a whistle-stop tour to 10 key areas for creating a whole school approach to tackling bullying. And it begins with listening and participation, absolutely fundamental. How safe do pupils feel in your school? And as governors, are you able to answer that question? Do you know the answer to that? And there are lots of different ways that schools can do that consultation. A lot of schools will do a survey, a kind of annual survey, looking at how safe children feel, their experiences of bullying, and that's really important. It's important that children get that opportunity to share what they're experiencing. What we would say is it's important to really make sure that that consultation is fully inclusive, because as we touched on, it's often your children who are more marginalised, your disabled children with additional needs, who are probably more likely to experience bullying. So it's making sure that they're really fully able to participate in any consultation that you do. And it's a good idea having smaller focus groups as well with some of those more vulnerable young people to really understand what their experiences are like. And then it's important, once you've done that work, to share your findings and work with your pupils to come up with solutions. It's not being afraid of what you're going to hear. It doesn't mean that you're a bad school because you're asking those questions. It doesn't mean that you have a problem with bullying. It means that you're acknowledging that this can happen everywhere, and you really want to hear the experiences of your young people. And I'd say that's also a really good opportunity to understand from young people how safe they feel in the wider community and online as well. And that should really help influence your education to young people. And then use that to form your strategy and your policy, and come back to this year on year to see how you're doing and whether the things that you've put in place have worked and helped. Number 2 is values and culture, absolutely critical. That when you walk into the school as governors, and I know during lockdown that was really hard to get that access into your school, but how does that school feel to you when you're walking around it? How are children moving around the school? How are staff and pupils speaking to one another? How welcome do you feel when you come into reception? All of these things are really, really critical. And knowing your school ethos and your values and living them is absolutely vital. This is your absolute foundation. And I think it's really lovely when you go into a school where that's really, really apparent. When you ask the children, what does this school stand for? And they can tell you, and they can tell you the different ways that that's brought to life. It is really, really powerful. So I would really, as governors, that's a really good place to start, to really kind of consider together whether you are clear on your values and whether you're really living that as a school culture. And really fundamental to that is that inclusion. So does everybody in your school culture feel safe and feel like they belong? And requiring that respectful and inclusive language by all people at all times is really, really important. It sets the tone. So if you're not doing that, if staff are not supported to address behaviour, the low level behaviour, then the bigger issues can start to develop. So really supporting staff to do that, to address concerns when as soon as they appear with young people, is really, really important. And then leadership is absolutely crucial. So nominating staff and governors to be anti-bullying leads. It's really helpful to have that lead on the governing body who can give that support to the senior leadership team to have participated in this training, to make sure they're asking the right questions. It's really powerful to get your school council involved or have an anti-bullying group, again, who can help you look at that consultation, look at what children in the school are saying and share ideas for ways to create that school culture and influence your policy and your strategy and work together on your action plan. And if this is something you'd really like to take forward, Kidscape can share a template action plan with you that you can use. And then education and training. It's really, really important that all staff and governors are on the same page, that you've all taken part in anti-bullying training, and you all have a really good shared understanding of bullying and what you need to do as a school culture to keep children safe. We'd really recommend that this is part of induction for all school staff, again, so that you've got that real shared purpose and that shared response. You want children to feel equally safe in every lesson that they go to around the school. It shouldn't be the case that they feel much safer in one class than the other, to make sure that you've really got that consistency. And it's really worth investing in complementary training. We've said there, Kidscape deliver SAP workshops in schools and peer mentoring training, but there are so many different workshops and courses that you can do as a school to really support that anti-bullying practice. And then your anti-bullying policy. By law, you can have a standalone anti-bullying policy, or you could incorporate this into your behaviour policy. But as the Department for Education say, successful schools have policies in place to show that how they're going to deal with behaviour, and it will be dealt with quickly, and that these are well communicated. What we would say is, brilliant to have an anti-bullying policy, but it should just really be sharing what you do day by day. It's your daily practice that's so much more important. It's that setting up of the ethos and culture. It's the addressing low-level concerns. It's really setting expectations within your school, which are the things that are going to make the big difference. But what should you have in your policy? Well, your vision and values. Be really led by your values as a school. That's really, really fundamental. This is what brings it to life. Be led with kindness and respect and inclusion, because these are really positive things for your children to get behind. Some of you might be UNICEF rights respecting schools as well. So being led by child rights is another really good approach to addressing bullying really positively within your communities. Make sure you're including that definition of bullying is really important, so that everyone has a shared understanding. And we would recommend doing work with children and with staff around this as well, really teasing out how people understand bullying and how it presents. Include why it's important to challenge bullying, how you raise awareness of bullying, and how you're going to embed that within the curriculum. We have statutory relationships and sex education now, which creates a really good opportunity for bringing anti-bullying into the curriculum and using the many resources that there are out there from lots of different people within the charity sector to support that within your schools. Make sure that you're involving the whole school community in the development of your policy. I think it's really nice when schools have children's versions as well. I think that's really helpful to kind of bring the policy to life. I've worked with some special schools before that have done recorded versions as well. I've done short videos of key points, which I think could be really helpful for communication. Include some of those signs signs that a child's experiencing bullying, include how you'll support bullying behaviour outside of school, that is part of your policy, how children report incidents, and we'll come on to that, how you're going to respond, how to escalate concerns, and how you're going to evaluate and review the policy and strategy. So have a look at your anti-bullying policies and see how you're doing against those points. But again, if you need more support, do come back to us. So a little bit around supporting reporting of bullying. The theme of this year's Anti-Bullying Week is reach out. So how do we really help children to reach out? Well, firstly, it's fundamental that we train all staff to be able to identify and address bullying behaviour. Like we said, you really need that consistency. And what we would say is, quite often schools say, well, talk to your tutor or your head of year, but that might not be the person that a child feels the safest with. So children should feel like they can speak to the staff member that they feel most comfortable with. And so to do that, every staff member's got to be trained on how to listen and be ready to respond appropriately. We would recommend having multiple channels for reporting bullying. We've seen lots of good examples of this. So some schools will have a dedicated email address, online reporting tools, boxes where pupils can drop in notes. Again, that's a really good area to consult with your pupil population around. Making sure there's a really clear process for what will happen when children or parents and carers report bullying. In the Ofsted review into sexual harassment within schools, there was a real concern amongst children that they just didn't know what would happen next. And so being really transparent around what we'll do with that concern, how we'll support you, how we'll work with you to resolve the situation can help reduce some of that anxiety. Make sure that children understand your approach to safeguarding, and that information will only be shared on a need-to-know basis. And I think it's giving children the confidence that you'll be really led by them as well, that there will be times where you need to share information, but you'll work with them to come up with a solution. Make sure staff are confident in who to talk to if they have concerns about a child. This comes back to your designated safeguarding leads within schools, and making sure that your designated safeguarding leads very much see bullying as part of their remit. So how do you prevent? The shared values that we've already talked about, staff who are trained in identifying bullying and can give that constructive and consistent challenge, that continual cycle of listening to pupils and responding and improving your practice all the time. This is a work in progress. There is no school that has got this sorted, because everything constantly shifts and changes depending on your demographics, who you've got in the school, what the latest TikTok trends are. You've got to constantly be on top of this. Make sure you have a definition of bullying that's understood by all, and that you're talking about it with your students a lot as part of induction, that you're having those regular assemblies, curriculum time, that it's a part of education, both formal and informal. Do seek out support from external agencies. This is not something that schools should be handling alone. This is really, really challenging, particularly because so many influences come from outside of the school environment. And so if you're struggling, if your data picks up that you're really struggling with homophobic bullying, or you're really struggling with some online bullying trend, do reach out for help. Don't feel like this is something that you have to deal with on your own as a school. And take that action to foster inclusion and belonging. And there are so many different ways of doing that, having those visible role models, having shared celebrations, what you're teaching in history, the books that you've got, really creating an environment where everybody feels like they belong and they're cared for and they're loved. So how do you respond when a bullying incident happens? Firstly, you've got to make sure that you're really listening to all the children that are involved. As we've said, it's often a peer group behaviour. So think about the wider peer group and who else might be having an influence. We always say to parents and carers, when you're reporting a bullying concern to the school, really focus on the impact. Talk about, this has been the impact on my child, rather than necessarily getting into the criminal burden of proof. We're often involved in situations where the relationship between the parent and the school have really broken down. Sometimes people are arguing over CCTV camera footage and what it does and doesn't show. And sometimes the impact on the child has been lost within that. So focus on, how's this child feeling? What can we do to help them feel safe in school again? Really be led by the young person. and use your anti-bullying policy as a guide. Keep a clear record of action that's taken, and as governors, that's one thing that you can explore. What records are you keeping? Are they showing what you're doing to resolve situations? And then you can use that data to look for trends. Bullying is repetitive by nature, so if you don't keep careful records, it's hard to know whether things are coming up again. Make sure that you're taking minutes of meetings and actions, you're following your safeguarding procedures. It's really important that interventions focus on resolving the bullying situation. I think schools are actually quite limited at the moment in support for interventions around bullying. It's often disciplinary approaches or restorative approaches, and these both have a role. But one thing that Kidscape are looking at with the Anti-Bullying Alliance is what more can we do around interventions for particularly those children that are displaying that harmful behaviour, to really help them understand the impact and to help them to change. Every incident is an opportunity to look at what more you need to learn as a school community. As we've said, if you're seeing particular trends, for example, homophobic bullying, look for that additional training and that additional support. Do seek guidance as appropriate. I think one concern that we see on the parent advice line is that things can get really out of control, or you might have that criminal behaviour that's happened within your school, and schools can be concerned about where that information is going to go and about reputation. But it's fundamental that you seek guidance as soon as possible from your children's services teams and from the police, that you don't hang on to that information, that you are seeking that advice. Again, you're not here to deal with this alone. Do seek that support. And again, that came out in the Ofsted report on sexual harassment within schools, that there was a lack of reporting that was going on to children's services. And bullying is a form of child-on-child abuse, and it's vital that you do speak to your designated safeguarding leads and get that support. Check in to make sure the bullying has stopped. As we said, it's repetitive, so that has to really make sure that the children feel like the situation's been resolved. Seek additional support for the children involved. We know bullying can have a really profound effect, so quite often the young people that talk to us or come through to our parent advice line have experienced bullying, it seems like, in multiple schools. But I think often the reason for that is that experience of bullying, that imprint of trauma, really remains with them, and they carry that with them, and they carry that with them into the next school. And so that affects then how they see their relationships. So it's so important that you think about counselling and additional pastoral support for children who've been impacted by bullying, and do really work with pupils and parents and carers to encourage them to share their concerns. So the school environment matters. It matters in how children feel. Hotspot mapping is a great practical exercise that you can do as a school community, and to help children show you where they feel safe, where they feel less safe, what some of the practical things you could do to support children's safety within those areas. Make sure you're including online safety within your environment. You'll have different policies around the use of phones and tech within schools. Some schools allow it, some schools don't. But talk to children about the challenges that they're facing and additional ways you can support as a school. Create safe spaces. Break and lunch times can be really challenging for children impacted by bullying, but really challenging for any child that finds relationships hard. So having organised play sessions can be really helpful, creating those safe spaces for any child that might feel overwhelmed and might need that additional support. And then considering the wider community. If we had longer together, we could talk a little bit about that, particularly about journeys to and from school, where we know there can be high levels of bullying. So again, you need to be working with your external agencies, your local community, to really look at what's happening outside of the school, the wider school environment that might be impacting your pupils. And then the final area in terms of action planning is communication. So sharing that anti-bullying policy, making sure it's accessible and user-friendly, talking to children and parents about how they want to report bullying, listening and learning from your pupils, and getting involved in Anti-Bullying Week each November. Hopefully your schools have all been taking part this week. But Anti-Bullying Week is also a great opportunity to consult with pupils, to plan and launch new initiatives and celebrate your achievements. So what are your roles and responsibilities as governors? Well, we did a big bit of work last year with governors in Wales, and we talked to governors about what were the challenges they were facing when it came to anti-bullying practice. And the things that they identified were lack of information about school policy and practice and not knowing what was going on within their schools, feeling isolated from the school and other governors. And I think that was particularly the pandemic. It was quite hard to know what was going on. A lack of anti-bullying training, which is why it's been brilliant to work with governors for schools to organise this. Not being sure of roles and responsibilities, balancing the role of parent governors, had really interesting feedback around the challenges of that particular role, sometimes conflict of interest, sometimes getting collared in the playground by other parents and carers about bullying issues and not quite knowing where you stood. And then managing parental complaints. Ultimately, as governors, those complaints can come up to you, and so it's being really prepared and able to address those as constructively as possible. Now, there's a lot in the Ofsted inspection framework about bullying, and we won't go into this in too much detail tonight, but it's really important that you're aware of that and aware that this matters and this will be being looked at. And I think, part of that opportunity, if you're going through an inspection framework, to really understand the experiences of parents, staff and pupils is really important. And if you're doing that regularly, if you're doing that annually, if you can show that you're regularly collecting that data and responding to that learning, can have a really positive impact on how you're viewed. They will evaluate for behaviour and attitudes. And so, again, it's so important that you're really working on your environment and how safe young people feel, and that you can really evidence that. And then that you've got that culture of safeguarding and you can show you're acting in the best interest of pupils. And so for behaviour and attitudes to be outstanding, they want to see that pupils consistently have that high level of respect for others. And that goes back to your values and your ethos. If you've really worked on that, your pupils will do you proud, to verbalise that and be proud of that and celebrate that, which is so important. So what can you do? What practically can you do? Number one, be familiar with preventing and tackling bullying. It's not too long. I can't remember exactly how many pages. It used to be about 300, and I think now it's about 16. And so do read that. That's the fundamentals in terms of government expectation. Number two, make sure you're fulfilling your statutory duties under safeguarding. Number three, make sure you've got that clear definition of bullying. It's a really good place to start. Have a look in your school anti-bullying policy, see how you're currently defining bullying and how well that's understood by the members of your community. Make sure you understand that relationship between bullying and safeguarding. That's so important, that you understand that bullying is a form of child-on-child abuse and is a safeguarding issue, and that your designated safeguarding lead is very clear on that and is supporting those concerns. Understand the duty to prevent harassment and discrimination under the Equality Act. And that also comes down to how you're recording incidents of bullying. Would you even know what was happening to those children and young people in your schools and what trends you're seeing in your school? Understand the powers to discipline behaviour outside of the school premises. It's a power. Your head teacher can use that power to discipline outside of school for incidents that happen outside of school. But what does that really mean, and how are you communicating that to children? Again, I think a good place to start is to say, if it's impacting children during the school day, you want to know about it and you want to be able to support. Number 7, know the law in relation to bullying. I think the fundamental of that is that bullying is a safeguarding concern and that all schools have that legal duty to take action. Number 8, make sure the school anti-bullying policy is easily available. There's been various bits of research around how difficult it can be to find those school anti-bullying policies. So make sure it's really easy to find yours. It's on the website, it's user-friendly, it's regularly updated. Number 9, make sure your school's collecting and monitoring key information in relation to bullying. There's no kind of statutory law around how this should be done, which I think makes things quite challenging for schools. There has been over the years discussion around bringing in a duty to record and report that has been debated and resisted for various reasons. but it is important that you're writing down that your schools are have systems in place to note what's happened and how they've responded and the action that they've taken. Really critical. Should there ever be a serious incident within your school, you'll need to have that data there to really back up and show the action that you've taken. And what's shared with you as governors? Are you seeing any of that data in relation to bullying? Number 10, make sure your school complaints procedures publicised and accessible to all. Again, like the anti-bullying policy, it's not something you should be hiding. It should be really easy to access. Number 11, as governors, you have a really good opportunity to model those values and set really high expectations. So talk to your school leadership team about ethos and culture and why it matters. And 12, understanding that bullying is a part of school inspection, and that I think really doing that work to really listen and respond to your pupil population will put you in a really good place when it comes to inspection. So finally, and we've had to whiz through quite a bit of this, but we will take questions and answers at the end. If you need further support, advice and training, please do visit the Kidscape website. There are also lots and lots of other organisations that can help and support with different aspects of bullying, with different challenges. And on the website, we signpost to lots of those organisations that can give you additional support. You name it, there's somebody out there that can help you. So please don't go through these things on your own, but do reach out and seek help, because we're very much all in this together. So I'm going to stop there and then take any questions.
Thank you ever so much, Lauren. Wow, really, really interesting. I've got so many notes myself to take away. We have had some questions come through, and we'll sort of go through them, and I can see some people have got their hands up as well. So let's just start off with a couple of sort of ones that people have asked quite early on around the workshops that you run. Do you tailor them to SEND schools as well as mainstream education, or is it not appropriate for SEND schools?
Yeah, no, a bit of both. So get in touch with us, and we're doing a really big piece of work at the moment around autism accessibility, because about 20% of the children that come through to us are autistic young people. So all the time we're learning and we're responding, and we're trying to get better in terms of what we can offer and the support we can give. So do reach out and we can see what we can do.
Excellent. And on that sort of accessibility one, there was a question earlier about how we can make sure that we're hearing from the youngest pupils, so from the infant pupils. How would you go about making sure that their voices are really heard around incidents? Yeah,
so we do, Kidscape works with early years right through to young adulthood. So we've been doing quite a bit of work with Elmer the elephant in early years. If you go on our website, there's loads of different resources that you can use around exploring difference and respect, and good communication within relationships. So it's all of those practical hands-on things that you can do with younger children to really set that ethos and culture from a really young age. There's so many lovely things that you can do in terms of kind of displays and drawings and pictures to bring this work to life for young people, but you can't start too soon. I think we particularly see that with physical behaviour in schools. Sometimes we just don't talk about physical touch and boundaries and consent, and then the challenges really come when we don't do that. So talk about that with your children from a young age, around what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, about our personal boundaries. How do you know when you've gone too far? Children really need our support with this from a really young age.
Excellent, thank you. And there was a question also about Welsh schools. You do work with Welsh schools as well, don't you?
Yes, we do, and you'll be well aware it's a whole other education system, so there's a whole other training programme and package and support, and the guidance in Wales is statutory guidance, that the anti-bullying guidance is statutory in Wales, which we would love to see in England as well, but you've got your own guidance, you've got it all going on. Lots of really exciting practice coming out of Wales, but yes, we support Wales as well.
And on that guidance front, I saw that it was 2017 that the last time the DfE updated the guidance. Is there any sort of news that it might be updated soon, or is there somebody who leads on it within the DfE?
Yeah, it changes all the time, a bit like the ministers seem to be changing quite a bit, don't they? So which makes it challenging, and it falls into different departments, whether it's behaviour or mental health. I think it's fair to say that bullying does matter to this government and the government departments, but there's not an awful lot of guidance and support, and as you can see by when it was last updated. So the message kind of we take a zero tolerance approach. Schools need need to get on with it, which can make it challenging. But like I've said, there's lots of charities like Kidscape, Anti-Bullying Alliance, Diana Awards, NSPCC, who are out there to work with you and support you with this. So do reach out for help.
Lovely, thank you. One of the early questions was what to do if you hear about bullying in another school, so one where you're not a governor and it feels like maybe it's being downplayed in that school. What would your advice be to somebody?
I think I would think about who's got influence within that environment. So it depends how you've heard about it, but I would really support parents and carers and children within that school to share their concerns. And to go through the appropriate channels to share those concerns and raise those concerns. There can be strength in numbers as well. So if you've got a sense that quite a few parents are not very happy, I think supporting them to be able to share those concerns with the school leadership team is important. And on the Kidscape website, we've got quite a lot of advice around ways to have good meetings with school and good communication with school as well. So I would signpost them there and yeah, see who's kind of directly involved and support them to raise those concerns.
Lovely. So if I've got a question, how would you suggest schools handle it if after all has been put in place, they handle parental input undermining the school stance on bullying? So if parents aren't supportive of the school stance on bullying,
yeah, it's really, really challenging. You know, it's a whole community issue, isn't it? And you need the support for parents and carers because you're only responsible for children for so many hours in the day. And as we said, there's so many influences on their behaviour. What you can say is, this is our ethos and culture, and this is what we stand by within this environment. This is a safe environment, and this is how we keep this environment safe and supportive for all pupils, and be led by that and feel strength from that these are your expectations. But it is challenging. It is challenging if you don't feel like you've got that parental support. It's hard.
A question around social networks and messaging platforms in particular, which does seem overwhelming. I completely agree, Sean. Can you point in the direction of any good resources?
Oh my goodness, there are so many. Internet Matters are absolutely brilliant. They've got a resource on just about every platform that you might need and support around that. The Professionals Online Safety Helpline is phenomenal. So you can contact them anytime if you need advice on a situation on social networks. They've also got really good relationships with online providers, online platforms, so they can often get things taken down quicker. So yeah, there's good support out there. Internet Matters, Professionals Online Safety Helpline are both really, really good resources and can support.
Excellent. I would say we also ran a session with Smoothwall at our conference, and that's available to watch back, specifically around online incidents as well. How do you deal with anti-snitching cultures, where pupils are maybe scared of reporting bullying incidents? They've got a good school policy in place and teachers are trained, but students are just not coming forward when it's happening.
Yeah, again, I would work with pupils around what's going to really help them to report and help them to share. I think schools can be quite scared of anonymous reporting because of some of the safeguarding implications of not being able to follow through, but consider ways. You get some that are kind of pseudo-anonymous as well, so you only follow up if you absolutely have to. But I think, again, talking to pupils about what's going to help them build the confidence to share that. And I think we were talking about this as a team today as well, some of the challenges around I think sometimes when we talk about bullying, it can make it seem very sort of there's bullying and then there's not bullying, but helping children to see this more in terms of kind of harmful behaviour and ways of helping children to resolve challenging behaviour, conflict management, using some of that language can help children share something without necessarily wanting to call it bullying. So if they say, look, I'm having a real challenge with somebody else, what are some of the ways I can get support for resolving that challenge? Some of that can help, I think, break down some of those barriers. So looking at your use of language, looking at alternatives. Peer mentors can be really helpful for this as well. Sometimes other young people will feel more confident and more comfortable talking to another young person about their worries rather than to a teacher. And so, yeah, exploring different avenues and different opportunities, I think, is important.
Lovely. You mentioned there about language, and as you said, don't use the terms bully or victim. Is there terms that you would sort of advocate using that would be better?
Well, we had tended to use target and perpetrator because they're immovable, roles. We at different times we can be the target or we can be the perpetrator. But we recently took part in training with Respect, who challenged our use of perpetrator because it feels quite criminal. So what they would suggest is children who use harmful behaviour, and I quite like that because we're all capable of using harmful behaviour. It's easy to get a bit caught up in the semantics of it, and you have to find some way of explaining it to children. But I think probably targets, any of us can be a target, can't we, of something. And I quite like that children who are using harmful behaviour is quite a good way of getting people to reflect on the impact of what they do. I think is quite nice, but there's no right or wrong answer.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned focus on impact on the child rather than trying to prove incidents. What steps would you expect schools to take if incidents are reported after a passage of time?
Again, I think, well, we have a bullying log on the Kidscape website, and what we encourage people to do is keep a record of what's happened, when and where, and then what the impact of that has been. So I think even if it's something that's happened a little while later, asking them to share what they can remember in terms of what's taken place and how they're feeling now. What you're always trying to get to is a place where children feel safe and supported and that they're happy to come to school. And another good way of approaching it is looking at in terms of safety plans as well, putting a safety plan in place to support a child to be really safe within their peer group. What would it look like within that? What would that safety plan need to look like to support that child to be back in the peer group? I think can be a good way to approach it. I think talking about safety as well can really help take some of the heat out of a bullying incident as well. And again, sometimes that language can be a bit of a deterrent. Talking about what do you need to feel safe, I think can work quite well.
Lovely, thank you. I've got a question from John. What does zero tolerance of bullying mean in practice?
Well, we sometimes say zero tolerance means zero effort because it's very easy to say I take a zero tolerance approach. We often hear that alongside we have no bullying here as well. And so I think that's why we feel a little bit nervous around it. I think it, of course, we don't want to tolerate it, but it's something we have to keep working on all the time. It's a work in practice, isn't it? It's something that we have to. It's a daily practice to really prevent and respond to bullying. I think that's what we would encourage. I'm sure some people could come up with a better phrase than zero tolerance approach.
Oh, it's really interesting saying about the instance because you don't know as a governor what it's quite difficult to judge how many incidents of bullying you should be seeing on your head teacher report. You know, we get the report, but do you to benchmark it against other schools? I guess, is there any sort of data out there that we could be looking at against that we should be seeing this? You know, we should be expecting to see this number of incidents of bullying, or is it just varies so much from school to school depending on how well they're handling it?
Yeah, I think that's a really difficult one. I would not look too far to your left or your right. I wouldn't look too much to your neighbours. I would look at your community and I would do that work with your pupils to understand what their experiences are, how safe do they feel, how much do they feel like they belong, and let that be your benchmark. So you want to work on how can we get a better mark. That's not the right word, is it? But how can we do better next year? How can we reduce the number of children saying that they don't feel safe? What would that look like? What steps would we need to take? I think that's really, really important. And actually, we work with the Anti-Bullying Alliance. The Ofsted inspection, you used to only get outstanding if you had low levels of reported bullying. And so we had to work with them on that. So that's really not helpful because you're kind of discouraging reports of bullying, and having high levels of reports might just mean that you're really on this and you're really listening and you're taking it really seriously. So again, it's not necessarily a measure of good or bad. You want your children to be talking to you. I think the Ofsted report into sexual harassment showed that this was off the scale, and so many schools just had no idea because they weren't asking the questions. And so set your own surveys, do your own benchmark, and don't worry too much about your neighbours. Your children will tell you if you're doing a good job or not.
Thank you. Okay, excellent. A couple of questions around research about why the UK is so high and in relation to other countries.
Yeah, it's quite sobering.
Has there been research have they researched why that is? I mean, it is very sobering, isn't it?
Are we just horrible? I hope not. I think there are many. I think we're complicated, aren't we? Like every culture, but one thing I've read is that we're a very individualistic culture, and in more collective cultures, you have lower levels of bullying. So there might be something about hierarchy. School environments, I know those of you that who are in and out of schools know that the staff room can be a tricky place as well, can't it? And those hierarchies don't always make for a happy environment. And so that might be one reason. But we also have really good awareness of bullying in the UK as well. So I worry a little bit with those international surveys that our children and parents know what you're talking about, and so we'll talk about it, and we encourage people to talk about it and talk about bullying. So is there, with more awareness, more experience? I don't know. It's tricky, isn't it? But again, I think although that international research is a bit sobering, I think we've got to set our own standards, haven't we, and look at what's better for us, I think.
Okay. How can bullies themselves, so the perpetrators themselves and those impacted by the bullying, be supported in situations if the bully doesn't even realise that they're doing it, if you see what I mean?
Yeah, and there's follow on there, isn't there, around the success of sanctions. I think it's really hard. So children will use harmful behaviour towards others for lots of different reasons. We would really encourage and support a trauma-informed approach as well. So you're looking at what else might be going on for that young person in their lives. What else are they experiencing? What are they experiencing within the home that's influencing their behaviour within school? We know from research that children who are bullied and bully others have the worst outcomes. So they're the children that we really worry about. And so it's not that you're one or you're the other, but often the most vulnerable children experience both. And so I think it's complicated, and it's about individuals. It's about working out what's going on for that young person and what support they need to understand the impact of their actions and the impact of their behaviour. And that will be different from every child, and every child will need something different and a different type of support for you. Is really important. And I would say success is making sure that you're doing everything that's in your power so that every child in your school feels supported and safe and like they belong. And that's hard, and it takes resource, and it takes pastoral staff, it takes counsellors within your schools, it takes that real investment in emotional health and well-being, because bullying doesn't just happen in isolation. It happens because of all the things children are experiencing and what they're bringing with them to school, and you need a lot more people in the community to support you as schools around that. Which I think is important. So I think success is a school with a really strong well-being ethos, who's got those different avenues of support and is really working on that safe environment.
Okay, thank you. The figures we see do not show whether, so this is figures that are shared with governors. They don't show whether they are repeat incidents involving the same children. And definitely a couple of things I've written down is, our bullying data, we don't know whether that's linked to absence. We definitely don't check that as a governing board, and I think we probably should be. We don't look at it by cohort, thinking about what sort of data should be. Are there key things that you think governors should definitely be seeing in their head teacher report around what we should be asking?
So I think there is the incident data, but that's only good as one, what's reported, and two, what's recorded and how it's recorded. So yes, schools should be doing it, but I think those pupil surveys are more useful. I think your annual pupil surveys around how safe do you feel, and that data broken down into SEND, different ethnic groups, children on free school meals, that's what I'd be really interested in, because that's children telling you what they're experiencing rather than just relying on that records is important. I'd also ask the question around how many safeguarding incidents have been made related to bullying. I don't think that's routinely happening within schools either. So supporting your designated safeguarding leads to make that connection. And to be understanding that sometimes these cases are forms of child-on-child abuse where you need that additional support. So I would be asking that. And I'm glad that you mentioned absenteeism. We've heard quite a lot of that in the press, but we don't often hear about the links between bullying and absenteeism, and it's a critical link. So looking at your absence data and asking that question. At the moment, absence data doesn't include bullying as a reason, which I think is a really big omission. But really discussing as a school, have you had children that have left the school because of experiences of bullying? It is a really honest thing to talk about, and what you could do about that.
We had a couple of questions. I know that we were focusing on children today, There has been a couple of questions about bullying amongst teachers, and you did mention the staff and politics. Is there any advice that you'd give to governors around bullying that may be happening amongst teachers?
I would, because it comes back to that ethos and culture. Children pick up on everything, and so if you've got staff who aren't happy, who feel victimized themselves, who are coming into lessons upset or are stressed out, children will pick up on that. And so what applies to your children should equally apply to your staff, and how your staff treat one another. It's so important. Now, of course, there are different laws that determine that, employment law and practice, on that side of things. But when we do training around bullying in the workplace, it's the same principles. It's about ethos and culture, how you support one another, how you talk to one another, levels of respect within the school. And I haven't seen research around this, but I'm sure a school's staff room and how that feels is probably quite a good indication of levels of bullying within that school, because I think it's all part and parcel of the same thing. I think we set the standard for adults.
Okay, interesting. Question from Ian. Thanks for a very useful session. What are the most common themes children are bullied about? Is it the way they look, or what sort of themes are you seeing come through?
If you do a survey with children, appearance-related bullying will always come out top.
Okay.
But as research shows, we know there are certain demographics of children that are there also much more likely to be victimised, but it's usually appearance-related that children go for. And that's a really tough one, because you don't want to necessarily spotlight that within your lessons. We know that there's a lot of bullying that's related to skin and weight, glasses, red hair, you name it. Children will go for it, but it comes back to those principles, doesn't it, of respect and kindness towards others. But if you ask children, that will be the top thing they'll say, and that relates so much to body confidence, doesn't it, and anxiety and social media. All of these things are interrelated.
Sure, thank you. A couple of other questions. How can we involve parents in our anti-bullying strategy?
Consult with them. Talk to them every year about how you're doing as a school, how safe they feel their child is, whether think their child's experienced anything over the last year that you need to know about, what more you could do at the school. So help them to really feel included is really important. Sharing that ethos and culture with them, and making sure that they really feel that from you as well, that they feel like it's a kind and welcoming space, that communication between staff and parents is as good as it can be. It's a whole other session. We could talk about good relationships between parents and schools, but I think it is creating that kind, welcoming community, and parents feel it. I've got a 9 and 11-year-old, and I've got fantastic head teachers in my children's school, and it is about that welcome, that respect, that support. I think that's how you win parents over and bring them in, and have that shared sense of community. Lots of ways to foster that, and a lot of schools do it brilliantly.
Thank you. That's good to hear. That's reassuring, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not all bad.
It's not all bad. Jessica's got her hand up. Jessica, did you want to ask a question? I've allowed you to talk.
Yes. Hello. Sorry. I just technologically not very sound clearly. For context, I'm a governor in an infant school, and we are dealing with a situation at the moment, and there's a general feeling. The staff aren't entirely clear whether or not it's bullying, because the child that is the perpetrator they believe SEND needs, that it's just an expression of I'm uncomfortable with difference, that looks like bullying, it feels like bullying, but they're not sure that it's bullying. So is bullying, or should you take into account the circumstances of the perpetrator?
So I think it goes back to what's the impact been. So if that child's behaviour has had an impact on another child, then there needs to be an intervention. Support needs to be put in place. Again, I'd be tempted to go back to the language of a safety plan, putting a safety plan in place to make sure all the children involved feel safe and like they belong and that they're happy to be at school. And I think we do all our children a disservice if we don't support them to understand that and work with them on that. We've just worked with Lynn McCann from Reach Out ASC to put together a guide for parents and carers of autistic children, and she works all the time with autistic children and families, and there's a really good section in there around working with autistic children to understand their behaviour and the impact of their behaviour, and she's quite strong on this, that that's important, and it's important to help children understand of course there are situations where children have different communication needs, and that affects how they treat other children, but it is putting those plans in place to help them understand the impact that their behaviours had moving forward. And you can align that with your anti-bullying policy. You can talk about, you know, the way this behaviour could constitute bullying, and that's why we need to put this plan in place for things to change. Again, I think bullying can be such an explosive word, can't it? I know as a parent, as soon as you hear that, you just recoil and you're like, not my child, and get ultra defensive. But again, it's about saying, look, this is what the behaviours looks like, but we're going to put this in place to change things. I think that's probably the way I'd approach it.
Thank you. Can you just remind me, what was the name of the organisation you just mentioned at the beginning?
Reach Out ASC.
Thank you.
Brilliant. They're really brilliant. And yeah, lots of bits of resources on our website to support around them.
Might have to put a list together of all of
I know, definitely.
Thank you.
Name dropping different things.
A question from Kurt Cornell. As a parent governor, how might I approach senior leadership team about their approach to dealing with bullying, reporting of bullying, and highlighting the concerns around bullying without appearing to be stepping beyond my role and responsibility as a governor? I guess this is, as you were saying, that sort of conflict a little bit with being a parent and a governor.
I think perhaps you could approach it by saying that, you know, you've been on this webinar, there were hundreds of other governors on it, that this is an issue for all schools, and that you're really excited to see what support that you can give, perhaps offer to be the anti-bullying lead on the governing body. If there's someone on the senior leadership team you can work with to really help with this, and see all the brilliant things you're doing as a school, but what else that you can put in place and what else you can learn, just offer to help. I think that's quite a good way of approaching it, that you want to give that support rather than necessarily challenge, and approach it that way, because all schools are just, I don't have to tell you this, do I? You're trying to deal with so many things all the time, that I think kind of coming in with that offer of practical support can be a really good thing, and just try and get the message across that every school's dealing with this, and you're not on your own, you're not in isolation. Those of you that are in academy trusts as well, look to your other schools and see what they're doing, and seeing whether you can work together around this. Kind of have a bit of a kind of collective approach might be a good thing, but getting that message across that you're not on your own and you want to help.
Okay, thank you. One last, well, at the moment it's the last question, about how much bullying goes under the radar. Do we know what percentage? Is there a sort of data set that tells us how much, or is it just that we don't know?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? I think probably if you asked a school how many incidents of bullying do you have a year, they'd probably say, well, 1 or 2, or we have a zero tolerance approach. Some might be more honest, but that research from the Anti-Bullying Alliance with 30,000 children said that 25% of children said they'd experienced bullying in the last few weeks. So I think the reality is this is a big issue in all of our schools. To a different degree. It peaks from the transition from primary to secondary. So your year 6s to your year 8s are your danger zone. And so I think it's hard to know the measure of it, but I think if you've got children, you've got bullying. And I think that's probably the way to approach it.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And that does feel like a good place to end it on. Year 6 to year 8, we'll all be going away and looking at that, because I'm sure if you're in a primary
That's all of you.
School, it affects you. So yeah, definitely. Thank you ever so much, Lauren. It was a fascinating webinar. Lots and lots to take away. Lots of lovely comments in the chat. So thank you everybody who's attended. This webinar forms part of our Governors for Schools and Kidscape's Boards Against Bullying campaign, which we've been running since the beginning of November. We'll be sharing more articles and an upcoming Governors Questions Pack later this week. Our bespoke e-learning sponsored by Allen&Overy is out next week, so please do watch out for that. You can stay up to date with the campaign on our socials and on our website. We hope, as ever, that you found this useful. It sounds like everybody did. Lots of food for thought and actionable points. So really hoping that it's going to motivate you to ensure that your board is against bullying. Thanks ever so much to everybody for attending. Really interesting session. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.